Welcome to a journey through time, where a single photograph holds the power to unravel generations of carefully guarded secrets. In 1884, what appeared to be a simple family portrait would become the key to exposing one of the most shocking injustices in American history. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories that will leave you speechless. Virginia, October 1884. The autumn morning mist clung to the rolling hills of the Whitmore estate like a silk veil, reluctant to surrender to the warming sun. Inside the grand mansion, servants moved with practiced efficiency, preparing for what would become one of the most significant moments in the family's documented history, though none could foresee the devastating truth it would eventually reveal. Margaret Whitmore stood before the ornate mirror in her dressing room, her reflection framed by mahogany and gold leaf. At 42, she possessed the refined beauty that came with generations of careful breeding and unlimited wealth. Her emerald silk dress, imported from Paris at considerable expense, rustled softly as she adjusted the family's heirloom pearl necklace. "Thomas, do hurry," she called to her husband, who was struggling with his formal collar in the adjacent room. "Mr. Pemberton will arrive within the hour, and you know how particular he is about the lighting." Thomas Whitmore, a distinguished man of 45, with greying temples that only enhanced his authoritative presence, emerged from his dressing room. As one of Virginia's most successful tobacco plantation owners, he commanded respect throughout the state. His wealth had grown exponentially since inheriting the estate from his father, though few questioned the methods behind such prosperity. "Where are the children?" Thomas asked, straightening his black morning coat. "Elizabeth is with her governess, practicing her posture." "You know how she slouches when nervous," Margaret replied, applying a final touch of rouge to her cheeks. "And James should be returning from his morning ride shortly." As if summoned by her words, the sound of horse hooves echoed across the cobblestone courtyard. James Whitmore, their 18-year-old son, dismounted his stallion with the fluid grace of someone born to privilege. Tall and lean, with his father's strong jaw and his mother's intelligent eyes, James represented everything the Whitmore name stood for, or so it appeared. In the servants' quarters below, a different kind of preparation was taking place. Samuel, a young man of 19, with skin the color of rich coffee and eyes that held depths of wisdom beyond his years, carefully pressed his simple white shirt. Unlike the family upstairs, Samuel's morning routine was dictated not by vanity, but by necessity. "Samuel, you mind yourself today," warned Martha, the head cook, as she kneaded bread dough with more force than necessary. "That photographer man gonna want everything perfect, and you know how the master gets when things ain't just so." Samuel nodded silently. He had learned long ago that survival in the Whitmore household required invisibility, compliance, and above all, silence. Yet behind his carefully composed exterior, a sharp intelligence observed everything. Every whispered conversation, every meaningful glance, every contradiction between the family's public image and private reality. The photographer, Mr. Pemberton, arrived precisely at 10 o'clock in an elaborate carriage loaded with equipment. A thin, nervous man with wire-rimmed spectacles, he had built his reputation capturing the portraits of Virginia's elite. His photographs adorned the walls of the state's most prestigious homes, each image a carefully crafted testament to wealth and social standing. "Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Whitmore." Pemberton bowed formally as he was escorted into the main parlor. "I trust you've given thought to the composition we discussed?" "Indeed," Thomas replied, gesturing toward the room's most impressive features. "We thought the fireplace would provide an excellent backdrop, with the family crest visible above the mantel. The parlor itself was a monument to the Whitmore fortune. Persian rugs covered polished hardwood floors, while oil paintings of distinguished ancestors gazed down from gilded frames. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across furniture crafted by the finest artisans, and leather-bound books lined mahogany shelves. Though few in the family actually read them, Elizabeth Whitmore descended the grand staircase like a vision from a fairy tale. At 16, she possessed her mother's delicate features, but with a spirit that occasionally troubled her parents. Her blue silk dress, adorned with intricate lace, had been specially ordered for the occasion, and her golden hair was arranged in the latest fashion. "Father," she said, offering a practiced curtsy, "I do hope we might include Duchess in the portrait." She gestured toward her small spaniel, who waited obediently at her feet. "Absolutely not," Margaret interjected sharply. "This is a formal family portrait, not a casual garden scene." As the family gathered in the parlor, Pemberton began arranging his equipment with meticulous care. The large camera, mounted on a sturdy tripod, dominated one corner of the room. Glass plates were carefully prepared, and the photographer's assistant, a young man barely older than James, helped position the heavy lighting apparatus. "Now then," Pemberton announced, peering through his camera, "I'll need the family positioned just so. Mr. Whitmore, if you would stand behind the chair. Mrs. Whitmore, please be seated. Master James, to your father's right, and Miss Elizabeth beside your mother." The positioning took nearly 30 minutes, with Pemberton making minute adjustments to capture the perfect composition. Thomas stood with one hand resting on his wife's shoulder, the other holding a leather portfolio, a symbol of his business acumen. Margaret sat with perfect posture, her hands folded gracefully in her lap, while James stood tall and confident, every inch the heir to a great fortune. Elizabeth, despite her youth, understood the importance of the moment. This photograph would hang in the family gallery alongside portraits of previous generations, a permanent record of the Whitmore legacy. Yet, as she held her pose, her eyes occasionally drifted to the servants, who moved quietly in the background, attending to their duties while remaining invisible to the camera's eye. It was then that Samuel entered the room, carrying a silver tray with refreshments for the photographer. He moved with the quiet efficiency expected of his position, but as he set down the tray, something extraordinary happened. For just a moment, his eyes met those of the camera lens, and in that instant, Pemberton captured something unintended, a gaze that held not subservience, but a profound awareness of injustice. "Hold perfectly still," Pemberton commanded, his head disappearing beneath the camera's black cloth. "This exposure will take several minutes." The family froze in their carefully arranged poses, but Samuel, having completed his task, remained in the background. He stood near the doorway, neither fully in the scene nor completely outside it, his presence a subtle reminder of the human cost behind the Whitmore prosperity. As the minutes ticked by, the autumn light streaming through the tall windows began to shift, casting new shadows across the room. The photographer worked with practiced precision, but he couldn't have known that he was capturing more than just a family portrait. He was documenting a moment that would eventually expose one of the most carefully guarded secrets in Virginia society. When the exposure was finally complete, the family relaxed with visible relief. Thomas immediately began discussing business matters with Pemberton, while Margaret fussed over Elizabeth's appearance. James, restless from standing still, wandered to the window to watch the estate's daily activities. Samuel, his brief moment in the spotlight over, quietly gathered the empty glasses and prepared to return to the kitchen. But as he moved toward the door, Elizabeth's voice stopped him. "Samuel," she said softly, "thank you for the refreshments." It was a simple courtesy, barely noticed by the adults in the room, but Samuel recognized it for what it was, a small act of human recognition in a world that preferred to pretend he didn't exist. He nodded respectfully and continued on his way, unaware that his image had been captured forever, destined to become the key that would unlock decades of buried truth. As Pemberton packed his equipment, He chatted amiably with the family about the development process and when they might expect to see the finished portrait. The glass plates would be carefully transported to his studio, where the delicate process of creating the final photograph would take place over several days. "I believe this will be one of my finest works," Pemberton declared as he prepared to leave. "The composition captures not just your family's dignity, but the very essence of Southern aristocracy." Thomas smiled with satisfaction, already envisioning the portrait's place of honor in the main hall. It would serve as a testament to the Whitmore legacy, a symbol of their rightful place among Virginia's elite. He could never have imagined that the same photograph would one day threaten to destroy everything his family had built. As the photographer's carriage disappeared down the tree-lined drive, life at the Whitmore estate returned to its normal rhythm. The family dispersed to their various activities, Thomas to his study to review plantation accounts, Margaret to oversee the household staff, James to his studies, and Elizabeth to her music lessons. But in the servants' quarters, Samuel sat quietly on his narrow bed, staring out the small window at the vast estate that surrounded them. He thought about the moment when the photographer's camera had captured his image, wondering if anyone would ever truly see him, not as a servant, not as property, but as a human being with thoughts, dreams, and an unshakable sense of justice. The autumn afternoons stretched before them, peaceful and seemingly ordinary. None of them could foresee that the photograph taken that morning would survive long after they were gone, carrying with it secrets that would eventually demand to be told. The camera had captured more than just their images. It had preserved a moment of truth that would echo through generations, waiting for the right moment to reveal the injustice hidden behind the Whitmore family's carefully constructed facade. The same evening, October 1884. As twilight painted the Virginia sky in shades of amber and crimson, the Whitmore mansion settled into its evening routine. Gas lamps flickered to life throughout the grand rooms, casting dancing shadows that seemed to whisper secrets of their own. The family had retired to the drawing room after dinner, but beneath the veneer of domestic tranquility, undercurrents of tension flowed like hidden streams. Samuel moved through the house with practiced silence, collecting the dinner service and preparing the rooms for night. His duties required him to be everywhere and nowhere, visible when needed, but invisible when convenience demanded it. Tonight, however, his usual routine would be interrupted by a conversation that would change everything he thought he knew about his place in the world. In the master's study, Thomas Whitmore sat behind his massive oak desk, reviewing ledgers by lamplight. The numbers told a story of remarkable prosperity, tobacco yields that exceeded all expectations, investments that seemed to multiply overnight, and a social standing that grew stronger each year. But hidden within those carefully maintained records lay the true source of the Whitmore fortune, a secret so explosive it could destroy not just the family's reputation, but their very lives. A soft knock interrupted his calculations. "Come," Thomas called, not looking up from his papers. Samuel entered, carrying a tray with brandy and cigars, the evening ritual that Thomas had maintained since inheriting the estate. As he set down the tray, Thomas finally raised his eyes, studying the young man with an intensity that made Samuel's skin prickle with unease. "Samuel," Thomas said slowly, his voice carrying an odd weight, "how long have you been with this family?" "Since I was a child, sir," Samuel replied carefully, maintaining the deferential tone that had become second nature. "My mother brought me here when I was perhaps 5 years old." Thomas nodded, swirling the brandy in his glass. "And your mother? She worked in the house as well?" "Yes, sir. She was Mrs. Whitmore's personal maid until—" Samuel's voice trailed off. The memory of his mother's sudden disappearance when he was 12 still haunted him. One morning she had simply been gone, and when he asked about her, he was told she had been sold to a family in Charleston. He had never seen her again. Until she was no longer needed, Thomas finished, his tone suggesting the conversation was moving in a direction Samuel couldn't yet comprehend. "Tell me, Samuel, what do you see when you look in the mirror?" The question was so unexpected that Samuel almost forgot to maintain his composure. "Sir, your features, your colouring. Has anyone ever remarked upon them?" Samuel's heart began to race, though he couldn't understand why. No, sir. I don't understand." Thomas rose from his chair and walked to the window, gazing out at the moonlit grounds. "There are things about this family, about this estate, that are not what they appear to be. Secrets that have been carefully maintained for the sake of propriety." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Samuel remained motionless, every instinct telling him that this conversation was dangerous territory, but unable to leave without being dismissed. "Your mother," Thomas continued, still facing the window, "was a remarkable woman, beautiful, intelligent, and unfortunately for her, she caught the attention of someone who should have known better." The words hit Samuel like physical blows. He felt the room spinning around him as the implications became clear. "Sir, I don't think—" "My father," Thomas said quietly, turning to face Samuel directly, "was not a man who respected boundaries, and your mother paid the price for his appetites." Samuel's legs nearly gave out beneath him. The truth that Thomas was revealing shattered everything he had believed about his identity, his place in the world, his very existence. "You're saying that I'm my half-brother," Thomas confirmed, his voice barely above a whisper, "which makes you a Whitmore by blood, if not by law." The revelation hung in the air between them, like a sword waiting to fall. Samuel's mind raced through memories, searching for signs he might have missed. The way certain servants looked at him, whispered conversations that stopped when he approached. The inexplicable protection he had sometimes received from Thomas himself. "Why are you telling me this?" Samuel asked, his voice hoarse with shock. Thomas returned to his desk, pouring himself another brandy with hands that trembled slightly. "Because circumstances are about to change. There are developments that may require certain adjustments to our family arrangements." Before Samuel could ask what he meant, the study door opened and Margaret Whitmore entered without knocking, a breach of etiquette that immediately signaled the gravity of the situation. "Thomas," she said sharply, her eyes darting between her husband and Samuel, "what is the meaning of this? Why is he still here?" "Margaret, please sit down," Thomas said wearily. "It's time we discuss the future." Margaret's face went pale as she realized what was happening. "You told him," she whispered, sinking into a chair. "Dear God, Thomas, you actually told him." "The boy has a right to know," Thomas replied, though his conviction seemed to waver under his wife's horrified gaze. "A right?" Margaret's voice rose dangerously. "He has no rights. He's a servant, nothing more. This family's reputation, our children's future, everything we've built depends on maintaining the proper order of things." Samuel stood frozen, watching this argument about his very existence unfold before him. The casual way they discussed his humanity, or lack thereof, cut deeper than any physical wound ever could. "The proper order," Thomas repeated bitterly. "And what order is that, Margaret?" "The one where we profit from the labor of my own blood, where we treat my father's son as property." "He is not your father's son in any way that matters," Margaret hissed. "He is the product of an unfortunate incident, nothing more. And if you think for one moment that I will allow this family's legacy to be destroyed by your sudden attack of conscience—" "Enough," Thomas said firmly, raising his hand. "The decision is made. Samuel will be provided for." Margaret's eyes narrowed dangerously. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means," Thomas said, meeting her gaze steadily, "that arrangements will be made for his education and eventual freedom. quietly, of course, and in a manner that protects the family's interests. Samuel found his voice at last. "And if I refuse your arrangements?" Both Thomas and Margaret turned to stare at him as if they had forgotten he was capable of independent thought. "Refuse?" Margaret laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You think you have a choice in this matter?" "Everyone has choices," Samuel replied, surprised by his own boldness. "Even those you prefer to think of as property." The tension in the room became almost unbearable. Thomas studied Samuel with new interest, perhaps seeing for the first time not just a servant, but a young man with intelligence, dignity, and a will of his own. "What would you want?" Thomas asked quietly. Samuel considered the question carefully. His entire world had been turned upside down in the space of a few minutes. But one thing had become crystal clear: he would no longer accept being invisible. "I want the truth," he said finally. "All of it. About my mother, about what happened to her, about why you've kept this secret for so long." Margaret stood abruptly. "This is madness. Thomas, I forbid you to continue this conversation. You forbid me." Thomas's voice carried a warning that made Margaret step back. "Need I remind you, my dear, that your own position in this family depends entirely on my goodwill?" The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Margaret's face went white, and she sank back into her chair without another word. Thomas turned back to Samuel. "Your mother was sent away because Margaret demanded it. She was pregnant again, with you, and my father refused to acknowledge what he had done. When you were born, it was decided that you would be raised as a servant, with no knowledge of your true parentage. And my mother agreed to this?" "Your mother had no choice," Thomas said sadly. "She was told that if she ever spoke of the truth, both she and you would be sold to the worst kind of plantation, where neither of you would survive long." Samuel felt tears burning behind his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. "Where is she now?" Thomas and Margaret exchanged a look that told Samuel everything he needed to know. "She's dead, isn't she?" he whispered. Thomas nodded slowly. "She died in Charleston 3 years ago. I received word, but I thought it best not to tell you." The final piece of Samuel's old world crumbled away. His mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything to protect him, had died alone, far from the son she had given up her freedom to save. "I want to leave," Samuel said quietly. "Tonight." "That's not possible," Margaret interjected quickly. "You have obligations, duties." "I have nothing," Samuel replied, his voice growing stronger. "You've made that very clear, but I won't stay here and pretend to be grateful for scraps from a table that should have been mine by right." Thomas studied him for a long moment. "And where would you go? You have no money, no connections, no way to survive in the world beyond this estate." "I'll find a way," Samuel said with quiet determination. "I'd rather die free than live as a slave to my own family." The word family hung in the air like an accusation. Thomas flinched as if he had been struck, while Margaret's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "Very well," Thomas said finally, "but not tonight. Give me 1 week to make arrangements. I'll provide you with enough money to start a new life and papers that will allow you to travel freely. And in return, you never speak of what you've learned here. You disappear completely, and the Whitmore family continues as if this conversation never happened." Samuel considered the offer. It was more than he had any right to expect. Yet it felt like another form of slavery, bought silence instead of bought labor. "I'll consider it," he said finally. "You'll do more than consider it," Margaret said coldly. "You'll accept it, or you'll find yourself on a ship to the Caribbean, where runaway slaves are still hunted down and killed." The threat was clear and credible. Samuel nodded slowly, understanding that his newfound knowledge had made him more dangerous than ever, to the family and to himself. As he left the study, Samuel's mind reeled with the implications of what he had learned. He was a Whitmore by blood, which meant that James and Elizabeth were not just the children of his masters, but his own half-siblings. The photograph taken that morning had captured not just a family portrait, but a lie so fundamental that it called into question everything the Whitmores claimed to represent. Walking through the darkened halls of the mansion, Samuel saw everything with new eyes. The portraits of distinguished ancestors now seemed like a gallery of hypocrites. The luxury that surrounded him had been built on the suffering of people like his mother and like himself. But most importantly, he realized that the photograph would serve as evidence of this moment in time, when the truth had briefly surfaced before being buried again beneath layers of social convention and family pride. Someday, someone might look at that image and see what he had seen, the injustice hidden in plain sight, the human cost of maintaining appearances, and the terrible price of silence. As he prepared for what might be his last night under the Whitmore roof, Samuel made a silent promise to his mother's memory. The truth would not die with him. Somehow, someday, the world would know what had really happened in this house of secrets and lies. 1 week later, October 1884. The morning of Samuel's departure dawned grey and cold, as if the very sky mourned the injustices about to be perpetuated. A bitter wind swept across the Whitmore estate, stripping the last golden leaves from the oak trees and sending them spiraling to the ground like fallen hopes. Samuel stood in his small room, packing the few belongings he could call his own into a worn leather satchel. The irony wasn't lost on him. After 19 years in this house, everything he truly possessed could fit into a bag small enough to carry in one hand. Yet he was leaving with something far more valuable than material goods. The truth about his identity and the knowledge that would forever change how he saw the world. A soft knock at his door interrupted his preparations. "Come in," he called, expecting to see Martha or one of the other servants come to say goodbye. Instead, Elizabeth Whitmore stepped into the room, her presence so unexpected that Samuel nearly dropped the shirt he was folding. She wore a simple blue dress, her golden hair pulled back in a modest style that made her look younger than her 16 years. "Miss Elizabeth," Samuel said quickly, setting down his belongings and bowing his head respectfully. "You shouldn't be here. If your parents—" "My parents are in town," Elizabeth interrupted, closing the door behind her. "I wanted to speak with you before you left." Samuel studied her face, searching for any sign that she knew about the conversation in her father's study. But Elizabeth's expression revealed only genuine concern and something that looked remarkably like sadness. "I don't understand why you're leaving so suddenly," she said, moving closer. "Martha says you've been given your freedom, but you seem troubled rather than happy." The innocence in her voice cut through Samuel like a blade. Here was his half-sister, raised in luxury and privilege, completely unaware that the young man she was speaking to shared her bloodline. The cruel irony of the situation, that she was showing him more genuine kindness than anyone else in the family, was almost unbearable. "Freedom comes with its own burdens, Miss Elizabeth," Samuel replied carefully. "Sometimes the truth about our circumstances is more complicated than it appears." Elizabeth tilted her head, studying him with the same intelligent eyes he had seen in the mirror, eyes that, he now realized, bore a striking resemblance to his own. "You speak differently than the other servants," she observed. "You always have. More educated. I've often wondered about your story." Samuel felt his heart racing. How much could he tell her without betraying the promise he'd made to Thomas? How much did she deserve to know about the family she had been born into? "We all have stories, Miss Elizabeth," he said finally. "Some are just more complicated than others." Before Elizabeth could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the hallway. Samuel quickly moved to the window, pretending to look out at the grounds. while Elizabeth stepped back toward the door. James Whitmore appeared in the doorway, his expression darkening when he saw his sister in the servants' quarters. "Elizabeth, what are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I came to wish Samuel well on his journey," Elizabeth replied, lifting her chin defiantly. "Is there something wrong with showing basic human courtesy?" James's eyes narrowed as he looked between his sister and Samuel. "Father wants to see you," he said to Samuel, ignoring Elizabeth's question. "In his study. Now." Samuel nodded, gathering his satchel and following James from the room. As they walked through the mansion's corridors, he caught glimpses of the life he was leaving behind. Servants polishing silver, maids arranging flowers, the comfortable routine of a household built on the labor of people who would never share in its benefits. In the study, Thomas waited with a leather portfolio and a small wooden box. His face was haggard, as if he had spent the week wrestling with his conscience and losing. "Samuel," Thomas said without preamble, "I have the documents you'll need, and enough money to establish yourself somewhere far from here." He opened the portfolio to reveal official-looking papers, a certificate of manumission, travel documents, and a letter of introduction to a business associate in Philadelphia. "Philadelphia?" Samuel asked, examining the papers. "It's a city where a man can make his own way, regardless of his background," Thomas explained. "My associate, Mr. Harrison, owns several businesses and is always in need of intelligent, hard-working men. He's been told you're a freed slave with exceptional abilities, nothing more." Samuel nodded, understanding the careful balance Thomas was trying to maintain. The story would explain Samuel's education and bearing, while avoiding any mention of his true parentage. Thomas opened the wooden box to reveal more money than Samuel had ever seen, gold coins and banknotes that represented a fortune to someone in his position. "This should be enough to last you several years, if you're careful," Thomas said. "But remember our agreement. This money comes with the understanding that you will never return to Virginia, and you will never speak of what you learned in this room." Samuel picked up one of the gold coins, feeling its weight in his palm. It was more than generous. It was guilt money, payment for a lifetime of injustice and a family's desperate attempt to buy his silence. "What about the photograph?" Samuel asked quietly. Thomas looked confused. "What about it? I was in the background when it was taken. Someday someone might look at that image and see the resemblance between us. What then?" Thomas's face went pale as he realized the implications. In their careful planning, they had overlooked the one piece of evidence that could never be destroyed or hidden, the permanent record of Samuel's presence in the family portrait. "The photograph will hang in this house," Thomas said slowly, "where only family and close friends will see it. And even if someone notices a resemblance, what could they prove? You'll be long gone, with no connection to this family." But Samuel could see the doubt in Thomas's eyes. The photograph was a wild card, a piece of evidence that could surface decades later to challenge the carefully constructed narrative of Whitmore family history. "There's something else," Thomas continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Something you need to know before you leave." He walked to his desk and withdrew a sealed envelope from a locked drawer. "This contains information about other irregularities in our family's past. My father was not the only Whitmore to blur the lines of propriety. If anything should happen to me, if the family's secrets are ever threatened with exposure, this envelope contains enough information to destroy us completely." Samuel stared at the envelope, understanding its significance. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Thomas said heavily, "I want you to understand the full scope of what you're walking away from. This family's wealth, our social position, our entire legacy. It's all built on lies and exploitation. You have the power to destroy us, Samuel. The question is whether you'll choose to use it." The weight of that knowledge settled on Samuel's shoulders like a physical burden. He was being offered not just freedom, but the power of revenge, the ability to expose the Whitmores and watch their carefully constructed world crumble. "I don't want revenge," Samuel said finally. "I just want to live my own life, free from the shadows of this family's sins." Thomas nodded, but he kept the envelope on the desk between them. "Take it anyway. Consider it. Insurance. If the family ever tries to harm you or prevent you from living freely, you'll have the means to protect yourself." Samuel hesitated, then picked up the envelope and tucked it into his satchel alongside the money and documents. He understood that he was crossing a line, from victim to potential destroyer, from powerless servant to someone who held the family's fate in his hands. "There's a carriage waiting to take you to the train station," Thomas said, his voice formal once again. "The afternoon train will take you to Richmond, where you can catch a connection to Philadelphia." As they prepared to leave the study, Thomas caught Samuel's arm. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I'm sorry for all of it. You deserved better than the hand you were dealt." Samuel looked into his half-brother's eyes and saw genuine remorse there, mixed with fear and desperation. "We all deserve better than the circumstances we're born into," he replied. "The difference is that some of us have the power to change those circumstances and others don't." The carriage ride to the station passed in silence, with Samuel watching the Virginia countryside roll by through the window. Every mile took him further from the only home he had ever known, but also closer to a future he could shape with his own hands. At the train station, Samuel bought his ticket and found a seat in the colored car, the segregation a stark reminder that his newfound freedom came with limitations. As the train pulled away from the station, he caught a final glimpse of the Whitmore estate in the distance, its white columns gleaming in the afternoon sun like a monument to hypocrisy. In his satchel, the envelope containing the family's secrets seemed to pulse with dangerous potential. Samuel knew that he carried with him not just the means to start a new life, but the power to rewrite history itself. The photograph taken just 1 week ago had captured a moment of truth, and now that truth was traveling north toward an uncertain future. As the train gathered speed, Samuel made a silent vow. He would build a life worthy of his mother's sacrifice, and someday, when the time was right, the world would know the real story behind the elegant facade of the Whitmore family portrait. The truth, he had learned, was patient. It could wait decades if necessary, but it would not be buried forever. Philadelphia, December 1924, 40 years later. The law offices of Harrison, Mitchell and Associates occupied 3 floors of a prestigious building in downtown Philadelphia, its mahogany-paneled walls lined with legal tomes and portraits of distinguished partners. Snow fell steadily outside the tall windows, muffling the sounds of the bustling city below and creating an atmosphere of hushed anticipation. Samuel Whitmore, he had reclaimed the name that was rightfully his, sat behind an imposing desk, reviewing documents that would have seemed impossible 40 years ago. At 59, he had become one of Philadelphia's most respected attorneys, his success built on intelligence, determination, and an unwavering commitment to justice. The scared young man who had fled Virginia with nothing but secrets and guilt money had transformed himself into a force to be reckoned with. A soft knock interrupted his concentration. "Come in," he called, setting aside the legal brief he had been studying. His secretary, Mrs. Patterson, entered with a telegram in her hand. "This just arrived, Mr. Whitmore. It's marked urgent." Samuel took the telegram, noting the Virginia postmark with a mixture of curiosity and unease. He had not heard from anyone in his home state for decades, having successfully built a new life far from the shadows of his past. The message was brief, but shocking. Thomas Whitmore deceased, estate in probate. Your presence requested for will reading. Urgent family matter requires immediate attention. Attorney William Bradford, Richmond, Virginia. Samuel read the telegram twice, his mind racing through the implications. Thomas was dead, which meant the last person who knew the truth about Samuel's parentage was gone. But why would a Virginia attorney be requesting his presence at a will reading? As far as the legal world knew, Samuel Whitmore of Philadelphia had no connection to the Whitmore family of Virginia. That evening, Samuel sat in his comfortable study, surrounded by the trappings of his successful life: law books, framed diplomas, photographs of the family he had built with his wife Catherine and their 2 children. But his thoughts were consumed by memories of a different life, a different identity, and secrets that had shaped everything he had become. Catherine found him there, staring into the fireplace with the telegram in his hand. "What is it, darling?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. After 25 years of marriage, she could read his moods better than anyone. Samuel had never told Catherine the complete truth about his background. She knew he had been born into slavery in Virginia and had gained his freedom as a young man, but she believed his education and refinement came from the kindness of his former masters, not from shared bloodline. The envelope containing the Whitmore family secrets remained hidden in his private safe, its contents known only to him. "I've received word that someone from my past has died," Samuel said carefully. "There are legal matters that require my attention." Catherine studied his face with concern. "You're thinking of returning to Virginia?" It wasn't a question. She knew her husband well enough to recognize the signs of a difficult decision being weighed. "I have to," Samuel replied. "There are things that need to be resolved, truths that have been buried too long." 3 days later, Samuel found himself on a train heading south, watching the familiar landscape of Virginia emerge from the winter mist. The journey felt like traveling backward through time, each mile bringing him closer to a past he had spent 4 decades trying to escape. The law offices of William Bradford were located in Richmond's financial district, in a building that spoke of old money and established power. Bradford himself was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to handling the affairs of Virginia's elite. "Mr. Whitmore," Bradford said, rising from his desk as Samuel was shown into his office. "Thank you for coming so quickly. I must admit, your existence came as quite a surprise to us all." Samuel took the offered seat, his expression carefully neutral. "I'm not sure I understand. Why would Thomas Whitmore's will mention me?" Bradford opened a thick folder and withdrew several documents. "Because, Mr. Whitmore, according to these papers, you are Thomas Whitmore's half-brother and a legitimate heir to a portion of the estate." The words hit Samuel like a physical blow. After 40 years of silence, Thomas had chosen to acknowledge the truth in the one place it could never be hidden: his last will and testament. "I don't understand," Samuel said, though he understood perfectly. "There must be some mistake." Bradford shook his head. "The will is quite specific. Thomas Whitmore left detailed documentation of your parentage, including a confession regarding the circumstances of your birth and the injustices you suffered at the hands of his family. He also left instructions that you be contacted and informed of your inheritance." Samuel's mind reeled as Bradford continued explaining the terms of the will. Thomas had left him a substantial portion of the estate, not enough to bankrupt the family, but enough to acknowledge his rightful place as a Whitmore heir. "There's more," Bradford said, his voice dropping to a more confidential tone. "The will also mentions a photograph taken in 1884, which Thomas claimed would serve as evidence of your relationship to the family. He left instructions that this photograph be examined by experts who could verify the family resemblance." Samuel's blood ran cold. The photograph, the one piece of evidence he had never been able to control, was about to become the key to exposing everything. "Where is this photograph now?" Samuel asked. "It hangs in the main hall of the Whitmore mansion, where it has been displayed for 40 years. The current family members, James and Elizabeth, have been informed of the will's contents and are understandably upset." Bradford leaned forward, his expression grave. "Mr. Whitmore, I must tell you that James Whitmore is contesting the will. He claims that his father was not of sound mind when he wrote it, and that your alleged relationship to the family is a fabrication designed to defraud the estate." Samuel wasn't surprised. James had always been protective of the family's reputation and would fight any threat to their social standing. "What about Elizabeth?" Samuel asked. Bradford's expression softened slightly. "Miss Elizabeth, she never married, has taken a different position. She supports her father's will and has stated publicly that she believes justice requires acknowledging all members of the family, regardless of the circumstances of their birth." The irony was profound. Elizabeth, the sister who had shown him kindness as a child, was now the only family member willing to stand up for his rights as an adult. "There's something else you should know," Bradford continued. "The will reading is scheduled for tomorrow, and it will be attended by several prominent members of Virginia society. If you choose to claim your inheritance, the truth about your parentage will become public knowledge." Samuel understood the implications. Claiming his inheritance would expose not just his own story, but the entire history of exploitation and abuse that had characterized the Whitmore family for generations. The carefully maintained facade of Southern aristocracy would crumble, taking with it the reputations of everyone connected to the family name. That evening, Samuel stood outside the Whitmore mansion for the first time in 40 years. The white columns still gleamed in the moonlight, and the windows glowed with warm light, but the house no longer intimidated him. He was no longer the powerless young man who had fled in the night. He was a successful attorney with the law on his side and the truth as his weapon. The next morning, the mansion's main parlor, the same room where the photograph had been taken, was filled with lawyers, family members, and witnesses. James Whitmore, now 58 and bearing the weight of 4 decades as the family patriarch, sat rigidly in his chair, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Elizabeth, at 56, had aged gracefully, her hair silver, but her eyes still bright with intelligence and compassion. When Samuel entered the room, a hush fell over the assembled crowd. The family resemblance was unmistakable, the same strong jaw, the same intelligent eyes, the same bearing that marked him as unmistakably a Whitmore. Bradford began reading the will, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. As the terms were revealed, gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. The confession Thomas had included was damning in its honesty, detailing not just Samuel's parentage, but the systematic abuse and exploitation that had characterized the family's treatment of their slaves. When Bradford finished reading, James immediately stood to voice his objections. "This is a fraud," he declared, his voice shaking with rage. "My father was ill, manipulated by this pretender who seeks to destroy our family's good name." Samuel rose slowly, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "I seek nothing but acknowledgement of the truth," he said, his voice calm but carrying the authority of someone accustomed to speaking in courtrooms. "The same truth that has been hidden in this house for 40 years. He gestured toward the photograph hanging above the fireplace, the same portrait that had captured his image as a young servant, standing in the background while the family posed in their finery. "That photograph was taken in October 1884, Samuel continued. I was 19 years old, serving in this house as I had since childhood. Look at it carefully, and you'll see what Thomas Whitmore finally had the courage to acknowledge, that I am his brother and a rightful heir to the Whitmore name. The crowd turned to study the photograph with new eyes, and the resemblance was impossible to deny. The young man in the background bore an unmistakable similarity to the family members posed in the foreground. Elizabeth stood, her voice clear and strong. "I remember that day," she said, looking directly at Samuel. "I remember you bringing refreshments to the photographer, and I remember thanking you for your kindness. I also remember wondering why you seemed different from the other servants, why you carried yourself with such dignity despite your circumstances." She turned to address the room. "My father's will acknowledges a truth that this family has hidden for too long. We built our fortune on the labor of enslaved people, and we compounded that injustice by denying recognition to those who shared our blood. It's time to make amends." The legal battle that followed would last for months, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The photograph, combined with Thomas's detailed confession and expert testimony about the family resemblance, provided overwhelming evidence of Samuel's parentage. More importantly, the moral weight of the case, a successful man seeking only acknowledgement of his rightful place in his family's history, won public sympathy. In the end, Samuel received his inheritance, but more importantly, he received something he had never expected: acceptance from Elizabeth and a public acknowledgement of the injustices that had shaped his early life. The Whitmore family scandal became a sensation throughout Virginia and beyond, forcing a reckoning with the hidden truths that lay beneath the surface of many prominent Southern families. The photograph that had captured a moment of injustice in 1884 became a symbol of the long overdue recognition of wrongs that had been hidden for too long. Samuel returned to Philadelphia with his inheritance, but also with something more valuable: the knowledge that truth, no matter how long buried, eventually finds a way to surface. The scared young man who had fled Virginia with nothing but secrets had returned as a successful man who had helped expose those secrets to the light of justice. The photograph still hangs in the Whitmore mansion, now owned by Elizabeth, who turned it into a museum dedicated to telling the complete story of the family, including the parts they had tried to hide. Visitors can see the portrait and read the full account of Samuel's story, a reminder that behind every carefully composed image lies a more complex truth waiting to be discovered. In his final years, Samuel often reflected on the strange journey that had taken him from servant to heir, from victim to victor. The photograph had captured more than just a family portrait. It had preserved a moment of truth that would eventually demand justice, proving that some secrets are too powerful to remain buried forever. The photograph still hangs today in what is now the Whitmore Historical Foundation, a testament to the power of truth to transcend time and circumstance. Samuel's story became a catalyst for examining other hidden histories throughout the South, inspiring countless families to confront their own buried secrets. Samuel lived to see his children become successful professionals, carrying forward his legacy of justice and integrity. His grandson would later become a civil rights attorney, continuing the family tradition of fighting for those whose voices had been silenced. The portrait that once symbolized wealth and privilege now serves as a reminder that behind every carefully constructed image lies a more complex truth, and that sometimes a single photograph can change the course of history itself. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more incredible true stories that reveal the hidden truths behind history's most fascinating photographs. Share this video with someone who believes in the power of justice, and let us know in the comments what other historical mysteries you'd like us to explore. The truth, as Samuel learned, is patient. It can wait decades, even generations, but it will not be buried forever. Sometimes it takes just one person with the courage to speak and one photograph to prove that their words are true. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. Until next time, keep seeking the truth behind the images that shape our understanding of the past.